Have you ever heard about the time Donald Trump crossed paths with a war hero and changed his life forever? This little-known story involves courage, sacrifice, and an unlikely encounter that left deep marks. And in the end, you will understand that destiny, however unexpected it may seem, always has a curious way of connecting people. But to understand this story, we need to go back in time. Cornwall, England, 1939. A boy is born amidst the turmoil of the Second World War. His name, Richard Cyril Rescorla. Growing up among the rubble of war, young Rick develops a fascination with the stories of the American soldiers who crossed the Atlantic to liberate Europe. Those men, with their uniforms and their strangely accented English, planted in him a seed that would change his life. The dream of one day crossing the ocean and becoming part of that country that represented freedom. Years later, after serving in the British Army and the colonial police, Rick finally emigrated to the United States. It wasn't just a new country, it was a new lease on life. While many immigrants sought fortune, Rick sought purpose, and he found it wearing the uniform he had so admired as a child. It didn't matter that he was born on another continent. In his heart, he was American. He became a citizen and, without hesitation, enlisted to fight for the country that had adopted him. In the 60s, while the United States faced one of the most brutal conflicts in its history, the Vietnam War, now Lieutenant Richard "Rick" Rescorla became a legendary name among soldiers. British by birth, but American at heart, Rescorla joined the United States Army and quickly stood out for his bravery. "What keeps me going is not victory," he once told his men. "It's knowing that you depend on me, and I will never abandon you." During the bloody Battle of Ia Drang, one of the first and most violent of Vietnam, Rick commanded a platoon that faced hundreds of enemy soldiers. The Ia Drang Valley was hell on earth. The hot, humid jungle air made it difficult to even breathe. The sound of gunfire echoed everywhere. Men fell, wounded or dead, while others tried to find shelter in the treacherous terrain. It was in this nightmarish scenario that Rick revealed his true essence. He not only fought with courage, but also kept his men steady, singing old songs from his homeland, Cornwall. Amidst the chaos of battle, his deep voice sang "Men of Cornwall" and other melodies that reminded him of his distant land. These songs were not just a distraction, they were a reminder that even in hell, humanity could prevail. "Sing, men," he shouted as bullets whizzed around. "They can kill us, but they can't silence us." That's how he earned the nickname the Lion of Ia Drang. A lion not only for his ferocity, but for his ability to lead the group even in the darkest moments. His eyes, say those who were there, never showed fear, only an unwavering determination to bring his men back home. The story of this battle became legendary. Ia Drang was not just a combat, but a decisive test for American forces, who faced an enemy much better prepared than imagined. Rick was not just a commander, he was a symbol of resistance. While the soldiers faced hell, he used his voice and his presence to keep the men calm. One of his comrades in the battle, James Daniels, would recall years later, "When we all thought we were going to die, Rick looked me in the eyes and said, 'Hold your position. We're going to survive this, and one day you'll tell this story to your grandchildren.' At that moment, I believed him. And he was right." But what happened next? How did this war hero, this immigrant who became the personification of the American dream, end up in the heart of Manhattan, far from the battlefields? After leaving the army, Rick became head of security for one of the largest towers of the World Trade Center. He knew that, even far from war, danger always lurked. He carried the lessons of Vietnam and applied his military experience to prevent tragedies before they happened. And it was this distrust, this vision trained to identify risks, that made him predict a catastrophe. In war, he used to say to his colleagues, you learn to look to the horizon, not at what's happening now, but at what might happen next. And what I see on the horizon worries me. In the 90s, Rescorla analyzed the security of the World Trade Center and realized serious flaws. The building was imposing, but vulnerable. Its accesses were easy, its defenses practically non-existent. After the bombing of 1993, when a truck bomb exploded in the building's garage, he issued a warning. The WTC was an obvious target, and the next attack would not come from the basement, but from the sky. In a tense meeting with executives from Morgan Stanley, the company he worked for, Rick presented a detailed report. He pointed to the ceiling and declared, if they want to cause real damage, they'll come from above. Airplanes maybe, and this time it won't be a warning. The executives exchanged incredulous glances. One of them laughed nervously. Rick, you've been watching too many action movies. That will never happen. Rick was not shaken. With the calm that only those who have faced death up close possess, he replied, they also said the Titanic was unsinkable. Rick tried to convince the authorities and owners of the Twin Towers to strengthen security, but few listened. He prepared evacuation plans, trained employees, tested escape routes. He organized regular exercises, to the displeasure of many who saw this as an exaggeration. This will never happen, they said, but he knew the danger was real. When you've seen death face to face like I have, he said to his wife Susan, you understand that prevention isn't paranoia, it's survival. One of the few who seemed to share his concern was Donald Trump. Trump, a real estate mogul and always controversial figure, had strong opinions on security and terrorism. In an interview given to a local New York radio station in 1999, he himself had already said that the WTC could be the target of something much worse. Those towers are a symbol, and symbols are targets, he declared. When he learned of Rescorla's concerns through a mutual friend, Trump tried to use his influence to amplify the alerts. He knew the importance of security in large-scale developments and warned that the towers were a symbol of the United States, and symbols always attract enemies. A threat to the World Trade Center was a threat to American identity itself. At a charity dinner, Trump and Rescorla met briefly. The mogul, impressed with the ex-military man's experience and conviction, commented, men like you see what others can't see. It's a shame that we need tragedies to learn to listen. Rescorla simply nodded with his characteristic seriousness. Listening is easy. The hard part is acting before it's too late. But at the time, their warnings and Trump's were ignored. The authorities were more concerned with the present than with possible future threats. Until the day that would change history arrived. September 11th, 2001. The Manhattan sky was clear, a blue so perfect that it seemed ironic for what was about to happen. Rick had just arrived at his office when, at 8:46 in the morning, the first plane hit the North Tower. The impact was devastating. The building shook, windows broke, and a shockwave ran through the entire structure. People panicked, corridors filled with smoke, chaos took over the upper floors. In the South Tower, Rick Rescorla felt the tremor. He looked out the window and saw smoke coming from the North Tower. There was no surprise in his gaze, only the confirmation of something he had feared for years. He picked up the phone and called his wife. Something happened, he said with a surreal calm. Don't worry, I'm going to get everyone out of here. Susan, on the other end of the line, felt a chill. Rick, get out of there too. He paused. You know I can't. I have over 2,700 people to evacuate. I love you. Remember that, no matter what happens. Before she could answer, he hung up. He had work to do. Rick Rescorla already knew what to do. The years of training, the evacuation drills, it all came down to this moment. He did not hesitate. He grabbed a megaphone and began coordinating the evacuation. Go down calmly. Follow the plan. We practice this. His voice, the same one that sang to calm soldiers in Vietnam, now guided terrified civilians to safety. While panic took over, he sang to calm the employees. "Men of Cornwall, stand ye steady. It cannot be said that for battle ye were not ready." The same songs he had sung decades before on another kind of battlefield. His training had not been in vain. Each evacuation exercise, each simulation, all of that was now crucial to saving lives. "Today is a day to be brave," he shouted as he led groups of people down the emergency stairs. There was no sign of fear on his face, just determination. One of the employees who went down with his help, John Olson, clearly remembers. He was on the stairs of the 44th floor, calming people, maintaining order. When we passed him, I saw in his eyes the same calm he must have had in Vietnam. He not only saved our lives, he gave us dignity in the midst of chaos. Thanks to him, thousands got out alive. But when the last batch of Morgan Stanley employees was safe, Rick Rescorla decided to go back. He went up the stairs to rescue the last ones who were still inside, ignoring the pleas of his colleagues. "Rick, it's all done. Get out now." But he replied, "As long as there is one person inside, my job is not done." He knew the risks, he knew time was short, but he also knew that his mission was not complete. Like in Vietnam, he would leave no one behind. He was last seen on the 10th floor, going up the stairs, still singing. Minutes later, the South Tower collapsed. Rick Rescorla gave his life to save others, becoming a true American hero. But how does Trump fit into this story? Donald Trump, who for years had warned about the vulnerability of the towers, was deeply impacted by Rick's heroism. He was in Manhattan that fateful morning and saw the destruction up close. The smell of smoke, concrete and despair permeated the island for weeks. But amidst the horror, stories of heroism began to emerge, and Rick Rescorla's was one of them. In his post-11 of September speeches, Trump mentioned the bravery of the men who sacrificed their lives that day. During an interview with NBC, with a choked voice, he said, "I knew a man who predicted this. He trained people to survive, and then he went back to save more. He was an immigrant who loved this country more than many who were born here. His name was Rick Rescorla, and we can't forget what he did." But unlike many, he decided to act. While the government made promises, Trump financed rescue teams, helped firefighters, and even offered his own resources to help with reconstruction. When he learned that some families of the first responders were facing financial difficulties, he secretly donated funds to assist them. He understood that the United States could no longer ignore the warnings. Rick Rescorla's story was not just that of a hero, it was a painful reminder of the price of complacency. In 2016, already as a presidential candidate, Trump visited the 11th of September Memorial. He stopped in front of the name Richard C. Rescorla, engraved in bronze. An advisor asked if he knew him. "Not personally," Trump replied, "but I know his legacy, and I promise to never let the United States become vulnerable again." In the years following the attack, Trump began to speak more openly about what he saw as serious flaws in the country's security. He criticized the lack of control over who entered and left, questioned government decisions regarding the Middle East, and warned that the United States was vulnerable to new threats. In a speech in 2011, he declared, "I learned from the example of a man named Rick Rescorla that predicting danger is not enough. You have to prepare for it. You have to act before tragedy happens." It was this vision that years later would help shape his candidacy for president. When Trump announced his candidacy in 2015, one of his strongest promises was to ensure that the United States was never attacked again, as on September 11th. He advocated for stricter immigration policies, a stronger army, and a tougher stance against terrorism. "What happened on that day in September could have been avoided," he said at a rally. "We had heroes who warned us, who saw the signs, but we didn't listen to them. We weren't ready. That won't happen again." Many critics argued that he was exaggerating, but for Trump, the lesson of September 11th still echoed, America could not wait until it was too late. And he didn't forget the heroes of that day. During his campaign, Trump spoke several times about the firefighters, police officers, and first responders who risked everything to save lives. He honored war veterans and made a point of remembering the name of Rick Rescorla, who for many had been forgotten by the media. At an event in 2016, he invited Susan Rescorla, Rick's widow, to a stage in New Jersey. "This is the face of courage," he said, pointing to her. Her husband saved almost 3,000 lives that day and then went back to save more. He deserves to be remembered not only as a victim, but as a hero who, until the end, put duty above fear. Susan, with tears in her eyes, thanked him for the recognition. Rick always said that preparation is the key to survival. He would be happy to know that his message continues to live on. As president, Trump approved a permanent fund for the September 11th first responders, ensuring that those who became ill because of the rubble and smoke received the necessary treatment. "We cannot bring back those we lost," he said at the signing ceremony, "but we can honor their sacrifice by caring for those who survived." But his most controversial decision came in 2020. After almost 20 years of war, Trump made a historic decision to begin the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. He argued that the United States had spent trillions of dollars, lost thousands of lives, and that it was time to end this endless war. In a press conference, he explained, "I learned from men like Rick Rescorla that courage is not only in fighting, but in knowing when to change strategy." Rick foresaw the dangers, but also knew how to adapt his plans. He saved lives because he was prepared for the unexpected. Our foreign policy must do the same. The decision divided opinions. Some believed it was a mistake, that the United States should continue fighting terrorism in the Middle East. Others saw it as a necessary step to avoid more unnecessary losses. Rick Rescorla was a soldier who saw the danger before it happened. He tried to warn, but few listened. In the most critical moment, he chose to save lives, even knowing that he might not survive. His story is proof that heroes are often not recognized until it is too late. In 2020, on the anniversary of September 11th, Trump visited the memorial again. This time, he left a white rose next to Rick's name. A journalist asked the meaning of the gesture. "Some men change the world with their actions," he replied. "Others change the world with their example. Rick did both, and this country owes him an eternal debt." Trump, on the other hand, was not a soldier, but over the years he adopted a similar stance, warning about the risks, taking measures to prevent new tragedies, and ensuring that America was prepared. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that courage comes in different forms. Some demonstrate it on the battlefield, others behind the scenes of politics. But the true hero is the one who, in the face of danger, chooses to act, even if the world is not yet ready to listen. And perhaps, without knowing it, Rick Rescorla not only saved thousands of lives that fateful day, perhaps his example shaped decisions that years later would affect millions. Because the actions of true heroes echo far beyond their own life, inspiring others to follow in their footsteps. In the end, Richard Rescorla and Donald Trump were never close friends, but their lives crossed paths in a way that only destiny could orchestrate. One represented courage in its purest form. The other, the power to transform that courage into a legacy. And together, even without knowing it, they wrote a chapter in the history of America that will never be forgotten.